All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out. Looks like we have close to 60 people that came out tonight, which, yeah, I mean, congrats, Zach. Well, that's the biggest meeting I've seen in person since I've been a member, so that's fantastic. My name is Elliot Prout. I'm the president of the Serenoa chapter of the Native Plant Society. We do have like over 400 members, so it's great to see so many people interested in this kind of topic, especially locally. I hope everybody did okay with the freeze that we had, the week-long freeze. I've never seen that before. Like, I'm born and raised in Bradenton, and I can't remember a single week where it was like in the 40s for felt like 2 weeks straight, right? But hopefully everybody's yard is doing okay. And I'll jump to tonight's speaker, and then I've got some announcements afterwards and some upcoming events. So tonight we have Zach Zildjian. He is a graduate of New College in environmental science. He's got his own design landscaping business called ZZ Design Services, which does ecological landscaping. I'm sure he'll tell you more about himself, but he focuses on biodiverse landscapes that integrate native plants and edible species. And he's also overseeing planting of microforests here, 8 microforests locally in this region, right? So it's a very exciting presentation that we have tonight to learn more about that. And without further ado, welcome, Zach. I did want to say too, I appreciate Zach doing a live picture of himself from tonight for the presentation. Yeah.
Thanks, Elliot. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys all for coming out. It seems like we got a good crowd. My name is Zach, and yeah, so anybody recognize some of these plants up here? We got Stokes aster is a native wildflower that I really love. Some lantana, and Liatris is another one that's really just a really nice wildflower that I use a lot. So I'll just tell you guys a little bit about me first. I have been in Sarasota since 4th grade, and both my parents were chefs growing up. So I had a lot of exposure to really good food, and just food has been a big part of my life since very early on. And then that interest was magnified because of a diagnosis I had when I was younger with Crohn's disease. And so because of that, I had a very specific diet and had to focus on the foods that I was eating and the quality of the foods, and just have gained a lot of experience with cooking for myself. And I've applied that to growing as well, and really utilizing as much food from where I know that it's coming from as possible. Um, and then I went to New College. I studied environmental science and took a lot of ecology classes and some botany as well. And that really shaped a lot of the way I approach landscaping to this day. And while I was at New College, had an internship at the Florida House, which, for those of you who don't know, was a really cool organization that was basically a model for sustainability in Sarasota. And I got the chance to work in their permaculture style gardens. And that was my first exposure to landscaping, quote unquote, and growing food in a real way. And that really piqued my interest. And from then on, I just continued growing on my own, and just kind of naturally fell into this work. Then after I graduated, I met Charles Reith, who some of you may know, who's been a big proponent of the microforest initiative in town. And I helped them with the management and planning and installation of about 8 microforests locally, which constituted uh, upwards of 7,000 native plants and over 3 or 4 acres of land. And those are microforests are really high native plantings, which basically when you plant native and uh, just canopy trees together at a higher density than you would normally in a landscape, it creates an environment that really exponentializes the growth rate and creates a much more resilient system. So that's another thing that I kind of took in with me to the landscaping side of things. And then since that, I've had my own business for the last few years now, and have yeah, had the opportunity to do a lot of really cool projects and get into that now. So first, I'll just talk a little bit about the ecology background that I have and how that influences the main principles that I use when I approach a landscaping or approach a landscape, which, like Elliot said, I focus on native and edible and the integration of those two ideas, as well as useful plants, medicinal plants, things that could be used as fiber or um, anything like that, dye plants even. Um, and then the other aspect that I think about when I'm caring for a landscape is nutrient cycling and keeping the nutrients on site. So the approach to typical landscaping is, you get there, you plant your plants and you get water on them and you give them fertilizer. But the thing that I've found is uh, really building the soil and creating a nutrient profile within the soil that's available to the plants with biology is the biggest thing that I focus on. Um, and then the way that we do that, a lot of it, for the most part, is by bringing in compost and manure and wood chips to the site, and those break down and really actually build soil rather than, degrade the soil with fertilizers. So, talk a little bit about how I approach a site. This is a couple pictures of from sites that I've worked on before I actually got started. And so when you're looking at a site for planting, one of the first things I look at is the light. Where's the sun? How much shade is there presently? What's the sun going to do throughout the day and throughout the seasons? In Florida, the sun goes low to the south in the winter. So that's a big consideration when we're looking at the planting itself. Um, as well as the hydrology of the site, is where is the low spots, high spots, where's the water going to move to when we have flood events, which we have seen that's a big thing recently. Um, and then what's already there on the site, what type of canopy, what type of habitat do we have that we can add to? And then what are the goals of the planting? What does the client want? What are the outcomes that we want as a result of coming in and doing a project? And so um, beyond the actual constraints of the site, the bottom line, like I said, is building the soil and creating a healthy soil ecosystem for the plants. So aside from actually sunlight and all of that kind of thing, we really want to just start with mulch and start with covering the soil, making sure that we are creating an environment that the biology within the soil can thrive and grow. So a lot of what I've been learning about recently is that the soil itself has its own food web. There's all different kinds of microorganisms within the soil, from bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, and then within all of those, there are categories of beneficial, neutral, and things that kind of aren't very good for the plants, and disease-causing organisms as well. So, creating an anaerobic or aerobic environment within the soil, allowing for oxygen, reducing compaction, and keeping the soil moist and covered is the biggest things that we need to do to actually promote the soil organisms to multiply. And within that process, the organisms release enzymes which actually allow the nutrients that are already in the soil to be uptaken by the plants. So, we can plant some stuff and then we can fertilize it and the plants will grow, but that's not really healthy, sustainable growth. Um, a lot of what I've been learning about is the fact that all the nutrients that plants need is already in the soil. I mean, that should be pretty obvious, right? Like we're not fertilizing forests and native habitats. So why do we have to fertilize heavily these landscaped areas? Um, so the mulch is really the first step in getting worms and millipedes to start breaking down that woody material, and then the fungi come in and also inoculate the wood chips and break down some of the harder structures. And the fungi actually release enzymes outside of their body and then break down certain nutrients and then allow the plants to uptake those nutrients through their associations in the roots. And this also just creates a soil structure that retains moisture and is more resilient to drought and erosion. And like I said, the bottom line is that when you have a living soil ecosystem, the amount of fertilizers that you need to add are minimal, if any. Most of what I use on my landscapes are biological amendments, so uh, thanks. Um, so we'll use compost tea and certain inoculants that promote the soil bacteria, soil fungi, and that is really all the plants need. And you can notice a difference when you spray plants with biological amendments, they brighten up. And let's see, yeah, I think that's it for that slide. So, like I said, the structure of the soil is really important. And so that's something that I look at as part of the site assessment before we get the mulch and everything down is what's already there within the soil. Florida has sandy soil in general, right? But I feel like Florida honestly gets a bad rap for having sandy soil that's very poor in nutrients. And I think that's because the areas that we grow in have been degraded by humans over time. And because of the sandy structure that we have, the nutrients can run off and be degraded and lost from the soil more easily. But that doesn't mean that we have inherently bad soil here. Mayaca State Forest, like you dig around in the trees under there, it's not going to be pure sand. So that's something that I think is really important for people to think about is it's not the structure itself of the soil, but what's happened over time and what can we do to, add that carbon and the life back to the soil. And so one thing that we can find in the sites that I've planted, just in a year's time, the top layer of soil that is there is very rich in organic material, and that's all just as a result of mulch breaking down and keeping the soil covered and moist. And I realized I've been saying soil. I want to make a distinction. There's dirt and soil. So dirt is basically dead. Dirt is the substrate of what we have in the ground. And soil is dirt that's living and has a whole the soil food web existing within it. And you can see that when you test the respiration rate of soil and the amount of gases that the microbes are actually putting off. That was one thing that I tested for my thesis project at New College was soil carbon and soil health around trees. And the more life that you have, the more you may see off gases, which some people may think about when you disturb soil, we're releasing some amount of carbon that was stored there. But when you add the life and the mulch back in, it's we end up storing a lot more carbon than is released by any of the disturbance that we do. So the just talk about the process. Once we do the assessment, once we have looked at the soil, the basic approach is very similar for preparing the land. We want to get rid of any invasive species that are present. We usually try and get weeds out of our way. I like to avoid scraping the ground if possible, but sometimes, and especially tilling, but sometimes the end result long term will be better if we actually do use those practices. Um, but like I said, the mulch is the biggest thing to feed the microbiome of the soil. And then we get wood chip mulch, ideally from tree trimmers because that type of mulch has leaves and wood chips together, so that creates compost right on top of the soil and breaks down really nicely. Whereas wood just pure wood chip mulch from a landscaping company will still break down, but it breaks down slower. And some people talk about the fact that pure wood chip mulch is just carbon, and so for that to compost, it needs nitrogen as well. Sometimes the wood chips will pull some amount of nitrogen out of the soil for a period of time while it breaks down. But I haven't found too many issues with that. The amount of um, carbon that actually gets into the soil from the breakdown of the mulch is it's visible. You can see the black dirt right under the mulch. That only takes 6 months sometimes to break down, depending on the material that we've used as the starting mulch.
I'm not sure. Oh.
So this is just a little graphic you guys can see. This site started with pretty bad torpedo grass. And so because of that, we decided to scrape it out. We just got the top layer as minimal as disturbance as possible. And then we bring in topsoil and compost and put that over top. And then we use the mulch to finish it off. And then this third picture here is just a freshly planted site. So you can't really see that it's grown in too much, but it gives you an idea of the process there. So these are some aerial photographs of my parents' backyard, which is just a tenth of an acre. And we've got over 30 to 40 different fruit trees in there. One thing that I want to talk about for this site that we did was um, luckily, I was able to observe this backyard for a couple years before I actually did anything to it, and noticed that the back corner, the whole line there, flooded, and it held water pretty badly. So when I created a design for this area, I added a swale in that section where it flooded, and then built a berm so that in that area we'd have ditch that could collect the water, and then we built the berm up so that we could still plant things in that area that was flooding beforehand. And it's actually been very effective in holding water and breaking down a lot of the nutrients and debris that we collect from the site. We use the swale to just throw debris in there and let it break down. And that's one of the ways that we like to cycle nutrients on site and keep everything that we can on site. I really say, unless there's weed, seeds, and invasive stuff within the debris that I clean out, I always like to keep it on site as much as possible, let it break down and feed it back to the plants. A lot of what we'll do too is chop and drop, where we grow specific plants next to fruit trees that grow really quickly. And then we come in every couple months or so and cut it back and just basically use that as the mulch around the trees. And that we've seen really good results from that. Mexican sunflower and Fakahatchee grass are a couple of the ones that are commonly used, and they work really nice together too because the grass breaks down a little bit differently than the woody stalks. And yeah, so in this site, we didn't actually scrape the grass. We just covered it with cardboard and then mulched it. Cardboard can be an effective method for killing grass, but it's not always my first choice when we're planting food, just because of the chemicals that are in the cardboard. But
Yeah.
depending on how long you have to let it break down and what you're planting for fruit trees, I think it's acceptable. I wouldn't put cardboard under a veggie garden per se. But the amount of mulch that we used just in this tenth of an acre here, I mean, we in the initial mulching was 60 to 80 yards. And then over the years we've continuously added, we're probably up to a couple hundred yards of mulch in this site. And that all just breaks down. And when you dig around in there now, we have 6 inches of just pure, really nice black dirt. Soil, you're right.
They only have a bug.
So we try and get recycled wood chip mulch from tree companies. But I do use floor mulch on certain sites, and pine bark mulch tends to break down a little slower. I'll use that on certain things like blueberries and jaboticabas that prefer a little bit more acidity. And pine bark mulch can be a nice aesthetic accent as well, but with the quantity of mulch that we use, I go for the cheaper options usually.
One quick question.
Yeah.
So are you mechanically mixing that in with the underlying native soils or just layer it on?
Yep, just layer it on top. Yeah. Sometimes when I'm first doing this site, like we put the mulch down and I'll sometimes sprinkle bone meal, blood meal, just some other nutrients that are organic to help just kickstart the process of breakdown. But what I've found is that, yeah, just layering the mulch right on top, it breaks down. And then if you dig through that top layer of mulch that's broken down, the soil underneath it is still richer than it was beforehand. The nutrients percolate down slowly. But yeah, it is still pretty sandy underneath there, but it's noticeably darker. The structure itself hasn't changed as much, but
How big is your layer typically, like topsoil, mulch, like how many inches are we talking?
good question. So the amount of actual topsoil that I bring in on site depends on what I find is already present. A lot of times I don't really feel the need to add topsoil specifically. Sometimes I'll use composted horse manure and stuff like that, which could be pretty thin, half inch up to an inch. And then the mulch, my initial mulching for sites is anywhere from 4 to 6 inches, depending on how long we want to let it break down before we go in and plant. So for certain sites, uh, we can mulch and then plant right away. But for food forests and fruit trees, a lot of times I like to mulch heavy and then let it break down first before we go in there and plant it. Especially if we're talking about using cardboard, you want to let the cardboard work and actually kill the grass before you go in there and start digging it up, because then you're allowing air and room for the grass to grow back up through it. Yeah.
Is just hot pressing with it while it's decomposing, or how are you using? Are you planting it to reuse?
Yeah, good question. So, depending on the system and the amount of maintenance that we want to have there, that's another big factor in deciding how the layout works. But I will typically have a set of fruit trees, and I'll have a tithonia and a fakahatchee grass next to each one or every other one. And then we go in and cut it back and just lay it around the trees, and that just breaks down. The thing with tithonia is it'll root itself. So that's why the fakahatchee grass is effective, because you can put the fakahatchee grass down first, and then you put the tithonia over it so it doesn't get a chance to root in, and it'll just break down really nicely. Yeah.
Or nitrogen that or that they just grow quickly and doesn't get good roots.
Yeah, I think they just grow quickly and they're easy to just cut and lay back down. Um, the Tithonia especially is just very vigorous, especially in the summer, and it has nice flowers.
Is the Tithonia, is that the Mexican sunflower?
Mexican sunflower, yeah. There's a couple different kinds. There's like a annual bright orange Tithonia that's smaller. We use the perennial bushy type that will grow 15 feet. And it also looks a lot better if you keep it cut back. The Tithonia, like if you let it just keep going, it'll get leggy and a little bit sparse. But if you keep it cut back, it'll be a nice dense bush that has really nice dense flowers as well. Turk's cap is another one that grows really quickly and is a native flowering plant that I like to use for that as well. Firebush, even. Any other questions? So this is a later picture, a better picture for you guys to see after it's grown in. This picture is a year or two old, so I need to get a more updated picture, but this is all grown in really well. Now the berm that I planted along the right side there has totally blocked the view of the yard from outside, so that was part of the design as well. And yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's basically we call it a food forest, but there's a lot of different ways to approach that. We got sugarcane there. I like to, in this type of setting, I'll use as many fruit trees as I feel like can reasonably fit, but I still add a lot of native flowering plants for the pollinators. And, we've got silver buttonwood down there that just acted as a nice barrier. Um, and yeah, like I said, this is just a tenth of an acre, so you can really do a lot with a small space. So this is the site that I'm going to be doing the tour of on Saturday. So you can see the before picture, and then a little bit after we planted while I was establishing, and then this is about a year later, this bigger picture here. And you can just see how much it's exploded. We've got sweet potato as a ground cover there, mixed in with bee balm and porterweed, and we got some perennial peanut in there, privet, that gumbo limbo, and that was a really nice one. And so the idea with this site was now we have green mulch. We don't even need to come back here and mulch very much, because the plants, the ground covers have taken over, and they're gonna feed the soil and keep it protected as well once that mulch breaks down. Let's see.
Got it.
So now I'll kind of just talk about a little bit of my philosophy with uh, growing plants and the quality of what we can get out of growing our own food. Um, the health of the soil is directly related to the health of the plants and the food that's going to be coming out of it and the nutrients available in the plants and the vegetables or whatever we're harvesting is going to be somewhat related to the health of the soil. So what I find is grocery store produce just feels so empty to me after having eaten food, directly from the garden. I feel like the way that industrial agriculture is produced is purely with chemical fertilizers, more or less, even organic, uh, doesn't have any focus on the actual health of the soil. So that's a big reason why I do this kind of work and love introducing people to new fruits and even fruits that they've had before, but that are coming from a garden that just makes it taste so much better and so much more full. And then we also talk about the pollutants that are in industrial agriculture. It's pretty surprising sometimes what they have in the soil in these big fields. And when we create these types of systems that I've been talking about, a lot of the fungi can actually break down some of these pollutants that might be existing. They found plastic eating fungi recently,
Huh.
and there's fungi that can break down um, different gasoline type products, and um, it's very interesting what is a result of creating a system that is resilient and a full ecosystem within itself. Um, I think that it's just a world of difference. This is a picture from a booth that I had a few years ago at the Sustainable Communities Expo. So this just gives you an example of some of the abundance that we can have in winter here in Florida. This was from December. We've got citrus, all different kinds of wild citrus. We've got avocados, we've got starfruit, we've got canistel, Ras sapote, black sapote, sapodilla. Um, there's quite an abundance of tropical fruits that we can grow here in Florida that a lot of people haven't even heard of either. And what I find exciting about trying new things is that it's all different plants have different nutrient profiles. So I think that the more diverse that you can be within your diet, even if it's just small bits of new fruits, new herbs, new wild growing things, that it helps with our own microbiome and within our just general health. Any questions? So this is just a quick list of just a few native edible plants. Some of them, like the Everglades tomato and the Seminole pumpkin, are more considered naturalized, but they grow very easily here on their own. Um, And what I like to instill people and educate within the landscapes that I do is for people to have a relationship with their landscape and to go out and just taste little bits of leaf, even just interacting with the plants in your landscape. I feel like really is just good for our mental health and physical as well. And so I find that having a reciprocal relationship where you're tending the land and then the land is feeding you back, it's very it's fulfilling, and I feel like it's a lot of what we are missing in this modern day is a connection to place, a connection to the land that we live on. So I've got a few here that I'll go through, but acorns is one that you guys might not know is edible. But yeah, the live oak acorns are actually pretty low in tannins compared to a lot of acorns that oak trees that grow acorns around the country. And it's a lot of work to process them and collect them. But I actually made some acorn donuts a couple months ago. You gotta just shell them all, and then you boil the water, boil it off, throw the water off to get the tannins out, and then I just fried them up. And they're really good. I used sugarcane syrup, and it's yeah, I just like trying wild foods like that whenever I can.
Goldenrod?
So here's a few examples of tea plants that I like to use that are native. Spiderwort grows wild up and down the whole East Coast. So that's one that the whole plant is edible or medicinal. The flowers I really like just putting in water. But goldenrod as well, just by virtue of the fact that these plants grow so abundantly in such a wide area and so many different climates. I feel like they have to have just a really good nutrient profile for us. And Florida pennyroyal is one of my favorite tea plants, actually. It's in the mint family. It's a specific mint. I believe it's the only species in that genus. So it's a unique kind of scented mint, but it grows really well and it adds a really nice flavor to different teas that I make. Some wild fruits that we got here are cocoa plum. You guys will see the cocoa plums growing all around the beaches, but it actually makes a pretty nice fruit that I find enjoyable to eat when they're ripe. And the pit is actually edible too. They call the inside of the cocoa plum tropical almond because it has the seed itself has a little bit of a almondy flavor. And the fruit isn't super flavorful, but again, anytime I have an opportunity to eat wild growing plants that are edible, I think it's highly beneficial. Ground cherry is a native that there's varieties that you can buy in the store. They call them like gooseberries. But that's a really cool one to integrate as a ground cover because it works as a ground cover. It helps, uh, cover the soil, hold moisture, and
I remember him.
it produces a pretty tasty fruit when it's properly ripe. If you eat it underripe, I think it can be somewhat toxic, but um, not majorly toxic, just somewhat. Yeah. Yeah, and then the Darrow's blueberry, I found this one growing wild at Oscar Shearer Park. It grows a lot in the pine flatwood type habitats. And it makes really small little blueberries, but they are very tasty. And it's different from the wild blueberry that grows up north. But it's probably very similar in its nutrient density. So some herbs we got are purslane. This is just a weed that grows everywhere. Sea purslane is another one that grows closer to the beaches and is actually pretty salty. But purslane is a great plant to put in salads, all sorts of stuff. It's pretty mild in flavor, and as long as you're finding it somewhere not on a roadside or where it might have potential contamination, I would highly recommend trying purslane. Um, Bee balm is another one that can be used as tea and is just very fragrant and herby and is also very pretty. And nettles grow wild around here. At Jessica's farm stand, they've got nettles coming up as weeds all over the place. I'll sometimes go there and pull them out, help them with weeding, and then I get to take some nettles home, make tea. You can cook nettles in soup and stuff like that as well. It's very uh, good mineral content and uh, just a diverse nutrient profile. A lot of people will use nettles when they're getting sick. It's a really good remedy. So that's all we got. Anybody have questions?
Although fruit trees and edible stuff do have to contend with
Well, that was not what I expected.
rats, squirrels, rabbits, whatever.
Good question. Yeah, rabbits, when there's rabbit populations, that can definitely be an issue for getting certain plants established. They really like sweet potatoes. Sweet potato is one of my favorite ground covers to use. Grows very vigorously. The leaves are edible. Make sweet potatoes, which are one of my favorite staple foods, honestly. Um, and but yeah, the rabbits, sometimes you'll have to protect things. My philosophy is to just create an abundance that the animals can't really compete with. Sometimes, squirrels will get some mangoes, but if you have a tree full of mangoes, then you'll still get plenty of fruit. Um, Rats are a thing that people are concerned about sometimes here, but the other thing I say is that rats are here no matter what. They're called palm rats. They they nest in cabbage palms. Sometimes they'll nest in other areas too. But if you have a bunch of fruit trees in your yard, the rats might find it, but it's not like we are breeding more rats just by having fruit trees, as long as you're not letting tons of fruit go rotting on the ground. But the other thing is that if you have fruit trees in your backyard and the rats are going there, that doesn't mean the rats are going to just go right into your house from there. So I think that having fruit trees are, if anything, a way to keep them away from your house. Yeah.
Two questions.
Yeah.
One, the last decade, I've been mulching, composting. I never see any worms in my soil. Second question is, you're growing all those fruits and vegetables. You never mentioned irrigation. Can you grow without irrigation?
Good question. Irrigation is usually pretty important. Yeah, I do always recommend irrigation. For some of the microforests and the native plantings, you can get away with getting things established at the right time of year or with some initial waterings. But yeah, for fruit trees and veggie gardens and stuff like that, I always recommend irrigation. What was your first question? Worms. So the mulch, what I found mostly is millipedes. Um, I will find worms in soil, but it does seem like some areas have them more so than others. Um, I think it might have to do with the actual structure of the soil. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't see typical worms all that often either, honestly. I don't think in Florida it's as telling of healthy soil as maybe some other places in the country. But we've got a lot of other little organisms. I mean, if you are digging into the soil and you don't see anything moving around, then, we got to work on it. But like at my parents' house where we've got all that mulch, I don't run into worms all that often.
Are there any downsides to millipedes? I mean, I find like hundreds of millipedes in my yard and I feel like they're not from here, but they obviously break down the.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the specifics of that. I mean, they're definitely beneficial as far as breaking down mulch. Um, it's, I kind of see it as like our alternative to worms because they create castings just like worm castings. I mean, you can dig through the mulch and that's what you'll find underneath that top layer of mulch is just black castings, basically. A lot of it's just the millipede poop. I don't know. I don't.
These weird ones showing up.
There's red ones. I mean, yeah, I haven't actually specifically researched the origins of them. I just know that they do good stuff. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from David Foster
Mhm.
asking what are the biological amendments you spray?
Yeah, so sometimes I'll make compost tea. If you have your own high quality compost, you can brew that and take the water that comes out of that and spray it on plants. EM1 is a specific product that is a microbial inoculant that's really good.
What is it called?
EM1.
And you spray that on the soil? not the plant?
You can do both. So, foliar spraying is typically more effective. It's more efficient, depending on what you're spraying. But I like to spray both. I like to give the soil microbes, and it's actually surprising how well plants absorb the benefits of the microbes on their leaf itself. I wouldn't have expected it just without doing the research, but the organisms create a protective layer for the plants, and it's kind of acts as like an immune system.
And the benefits of the tea are microbes or nutrients?
Mostly microbes. Yeah, because when you take the compost and you put it in water, you usually add uh, molasses or some sort of food for the microbes that are already present in the compost, and then I use an aerator to brew it for a day or two, and then you're colonizing the microbes that are already there, and then yeah, you spray those on the plants, and then there's a specific kind of time range that you got to deal with for it to be mostly effective. Like once you've made the compost tea, if you're not aerating it or spraying it within a couple days, you're gonna start losing the amount of microbes that are active and living in there. Yeah.
That's a question. When you're in like this transition period where you kill the top layer of grass and have bare soil, how do you prevent like weeds, invasive weeds from penetrating the soil? For me, the first thing I go through is like starting to obviously we're trying to avoid that.
Right.
Do you have any methods for culling weeds?
Well, if it's really bad, we would use cardboard. That kind of works as like it seals the soil and doesn't really let stuff come through until the cardboard starts to break down. But the idea is that we do the scraping and mulching immediately after. So we're not leaving the dirt exposed for any amount of time, really.
So that immediate mulching is what prevents anything to really penetrate that reserve.
It helps. Yeah, it's not always going to be completely effective, but yeah, it definitely slows things down. And I mean, if it's certain kinds of grass, like torpedo grass, there's not really anything you can do about that. But we do our best to scrape out what we can, dig out what's necessary, and then kind of cover it back up. And then if you stay on top of things, once they try and grow back, it's easier to keep weeds down if you stay on top of them rather than get out of control. Yeah.
How do you stay on top of grass?
That's a good question.
The grass, because I mean, do you just cut it off, mow it, or try to cut it off? Because you can't get it all.
Yeah, it depends on what specifically we're dealing with and what the maintenance protocol looks like, what's the goal and desires of the client or, the site itself. Like at my parents' house, we just had a dayflower, which is a pretty common ground cover invasive type thing that has just taken over, and we've just accepted that as part of the system, and we just keep it mowed in the summer, and in the winter it kind of dies back. But yeah, I think just growing more plants is the best method. I just try and plant as dense as possible, get my ground covers that I want to grow there established as quickly as possible. And so those help compete with the weeds. And yeah, like if you see on this site, there's not any grass that came up. Like you can see there was some there, but we just mulched it and then got everything to establish quick enough where weeds are not too much of an issue except for in the pathways on the edges and cracks and stuff like that. But the sweet potato now has died back for the winter, so we'll probably go back and replant with some other ground covers. The sweet potato? So sweet potato specifically actually is better to replant and move around. I found if you just let it grow, in Florida, the vine will just continuously grow usually for a couple years, but it ends up being a lot less productive after the first year. The vine will still produce and it'll make a ground cover, but it doesn't produce as much sweet potatoes. So depending on your goal, that's fine. I'd rather have a sweet potato as a ground cover than nothing, even if it's not producing potatoes. So.
Question, how you were talking about nutrient cycling and with, the native plants and native trees and stuff, taking down deep. Are you able to grow fruits without really adding mulch in it?
Yeah. So for instance, at this site, we just did an initial mulching, and then as things were getting established, we mulched like a second or third time. But after the first, it's a year and a half in the ground now, and most areas we don't really need to remulch because we have the living mulch, the ground covers, and the way that we added compost and manure and the mulch, everything's exploded there. Like we haven't even fertilized. But again, the chop and drop is also effective for that, and that is part of the nutrient cycling is taking the biomass plants that we're growing and then also cuttings just as trimmings as we're doing it. I like to try and just pile them up and leave them to decompose as much as possible. Yeah.
Any herbicides or pesticides or chemical fertilizers at all?
Not if I can help it. I haven't personally sprayed any herbicides since I've been doing this. I've used a little bit of chemical fertilizer, but not recently. And I've used pyrethrin on some of my nursery plants as an organic pesticide. But a lot of what I like to do in the landscape itself is the diversity that we have, the amount of different plants all growing together. It kind of, well, typically it confuses the pests. It doesn't let them just come in and take over a plant if there's a lot of other diversity around it. I mean, within the diversity that we have, we attract the predatory insects, beneficial insects that create a more integrated pest management strategy rather than having to use the pesticides. Or I also am selective with the plants that I use. Like I'm not going to put a ornamental hibiscus in a yard that is going to need herbicide or pesticides to keep it healthy. Yeah.
What, yeah, I could be more careful in the yard, which I have done. Where do you get enough compost and colors to add to that?
Yeah, so I've got a couple different suppliers that I work with. The best thing I've found is getting in touch with people that have horses or horse manure. The one thing you got to be careful about that is what they're feeding the horses. Sometimes there's a specific persistent herbicide that'll be in the feed that can mess up your plants if you use the manure from those horses. But most often I've gotten really good horse manure. That type of manure, you want to let it break down. I've got a guy that I get, he's just a private guy that I buy composted horse manure from, and some of my wood chip mulch when I can't get it dropped. But there's honestly not great sources for compost around here. I wouldn't really recommend Big Earth or Dakin, like as far as biological activity. But there are certain people doing it on their own. Like I've seen people selling worm castings on Facebook and stuff like that. I would support those types of people. My friend Derek and I have been making compost at a site in town as well. We're working on creating our own compost that we could eventually sell, which is we both took this soil course by this lady Elaine Ingham. It's a specific soil food web course that teaches you a specific way to make compost that results in the best or highest diversity of beneficial fungi and bacteria and protozoa and nematodes that you want in your compost.
Do you have any resources, books or anything about composting that you could recommend?
Yeah.
Classes?
Well, I would definitely look up Elaine Ingham's work. Sunshine Community Compost is another local organization that makes really good stuff, but I'm not sure if you can just buy it from them. I think you have to be a member. Yeah, UF has good resources. Community Harvest, SRQ, also is another good organization that works with growers and different producers.
What was the Sunshine organization you mentioned?
Sunshine Community Compost. That's one that you can sign up to be a member, and you can bring your compost to certain sites around town and they do compost for you, and then you get some back. Yeah.
I want to share a comment about manures.
Mhm.
When I was new to vermicomposting, I was very happy to get a donation of horse manure,
Mhm.
which was full of worming medication.
Oh,
Of course, I had to start all over again.
right.
But I think really the key to using manure is aging it.
Yeah. Totally, yeah. The best stuff that I've used is, like a few years old, even. Fresh manure will definitely burn plants and kill them, even if there's not the dewormer in there. But yeah, if you're getting manure, like ideally you'd be in contact with the source, get some information on where it's coming from, what the feed is. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, can you just put cardboard over a big patch of Wisteria? Or do you have to like cut it down first and then put the cardboard down, or what's the best way to get rid of that? Cause we have.
Wadelia is a tough one. I would mow it down, scalp it as low as you can first, and then cardboard and mulch heavy. But if there's any edges around it that it can take hold, yeah, Wadelia is a tough one. Anybody else got questions?
This is how you know.
Oh, yeah. It's also a good question. That highly depends on the site itself, the amount of space we have, the specific variety of fruit tree. There's some trees that are more dwarf than others. And then the amount of maintenance that the client is willing to do / have me do for them. Because ideally I like planting things pretty close, especially what I've found is with that last cold we had, trees that have dense canopies, they protect each other. And so I had some fruiting trees at my parents' house that were kind of under the cover of some other tree, and they're totally fine. But yeah, anywhere from 5 to 10 feet apart, I mean, big mango trees. I've seen big mango trees that are old and, their trunks are like this far apart. Like at Elling, there's a few that are totally fine. I wouldn't necessarily want a big mass of mango trees all next to each other, but if you've got just a couple and they have room to grow out on either side, you know. But bananas are another one that you can plant pretty quickly and pretty close together. Bananas and papayas are some of the best, quickest growing, very quickly productive fruit tree, not technically trees, but fruiting plants that you can grow and get fruit within a year.
All right, thank you, Zach. That was a great presentation and obviously super knowledgeable. I think it's really cool that all of us kind of are working to make our landscapes usable in some way, right? Whether that's native plants or using a combination of edible plants. So Zach is actually going to be doing our field trip this Saturday. It is sold out. We had to cap it because we're touring literally one of his clients' yards. But everybody that's currently signed up for it, a meetup is going to get an email this week with the address. And then if you can, we'd ask that you carpool there because it is in like a residential neighborhood and there's very limited street parking. But that should be a really, really cool field trip. And if it's, I mean, a lot of people signed up for it, so maybe we might have to run it back next year sometime. On the same day, so this coming up Saturday, there's also the Sarasota Audubon is having their first ever Fly Wild like festival, I guess. So we're going to be one of the vendors at that festival. Right now, I'm the only volunteer. So if anybody else wants to join me, just a tabling event, teach people about native plants and things like that, just come see me afterwards. That's from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Celery Fields. And then as far as next month, we're going to have Brooke Langston from the Big Waters Land Trust come to talk to us about some of their priorities for the future. And then we also are going to have our yard tours in March. So March 21st, we have 3 of our members which have put up their yards they're going to tour us around their yards. And that's always a big hit. So we're going to ask that you like schedule which time you'd like to view each yard. So we make sure there's not like 40 people at one yard at the same time. So we'll be sending out that registration link on the next newsletter. And then lastly, our plant sale is coming up in April. So just something to start thinking about. That's going to be at Sweet Bay Nursery once again. And anybody that's a Native Plant Society member gets 15% off any plants. And we'll be looking for some volunteers too. That's usually our biggest fundraiser of the year. So
What's the date?
April 18th is the plant sale. Yeah. March 21st is the yard tours with our members, and then February 21st is Saturday is the yard tour with Zach at that property. We usually have a bunch of native plants in the back that people can purchase. Tonight we just have one, which Sean Patton brought in, and it's actually a pretty cool plant. It's called Woodland Daisy. It's not commercially available. They rescued it from a construction site. So this is the only place currently that you can get that plant is tonight on the table. So if you want to bid on it, we'll give it a couple minutes. But other than that, that's it for me. So I appreciate everybody coming out. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I get the angels to do it.